This leadership mini-series is kindly sponsored by Minerva. Minerva is an executive search firm that works primarily with higher education clients to develop outstanding teams, cultures and structures. Minerva supports universities in making senior executive appointments across academic and professional services roles and in recruiting to non-executive and interim positions. Minerva's consultants also help individuals in the sector and outside find their best path through a career in the sector. Since 2020, 5 cohorts have passed through Minerva's Emerging Leaders programme that works with people in a critical development stage of their leadership and management careers, including heads, deans, deputies and directors. Minerva also runs Aspire, a pro bono leadership development programme to help maximise opportunities for talented minority ethnic professionals to enrich their careers, and Board Prospects, an initiative to provide people from underrepresented backgrounds with experience of governance. I'm Susanna Marsden, a higher education consultant who helps to develop and support HE institutions in the UK and beyond. This podcast takes a deep dive into the roles of people who work in this hugely varied higher education sector. Each episode reveals what's involved in a specific role, the career path that led to it, and tips on how to get in and get on in these jobs. My guest in this episode is Professor Randall S Whittaker, Principal and CEO of Bruford College, one of the UK's leading specialist arts higher education institutions. As a renowned figure for his work on representation and diversity, Randall reflects upon his own leadership journey, including what he's learnt along the way, how creativity forms a core part of his leadership approach, and why engaging with the wider sector is so important for career development and establishing a voice. He also considers the instrumental role of specialist institutions as part of a diverse HE sector and the significant impact that creative graduates have on the well-being of our society and economy. Randall, welcome to the podcast and thanks for being a guest in this episode. You're Principal and CEO of Bruford College, which is one of the UK's leading HE smaller specialist creative arts institutions. Now, I can only imagine that the college is a pretty vibrant place. Can you give us some insight about its focus and what goes on there?
Thank you for having me, Susanna. So Bruford College isn't just a place where people come to study. It's an incubator for creativity, a home for fearless experimentation, and a launchpad for some of the most exciting emerging voices in the creative industries today. It's alive with energy, full of people pushing boundaries, breaking new ground, and questioning the status quo. What excites me most is that this isn't a traditional passive learning environment. Walk into any rehearsal room or studio, and you'll find our students making, collaborating, testing ideas in real time. They are shaping the future of the creative industries, and they're doing it with the kind of drive, determination, and boldness that is absolutely essential. We are nurturing global artists, people who will define what the creative industries look like in the next 10, 20, 50 years. That's what makes the Bruford College so special.
And looking at your website, I mean, you've got a huge range of courses that you do. I know that you've got some new courses coming for 2026 as well. You've also got some vibrant research activity too.
Yes, absolutely. So practice research is key to what we do. And I think, Susanna, we've got to remember that creativity doesn't exist in isolation. It thrives on innovation. And that's what excites me about the possibilities of creative education today, whether it's new technologies, research, storytelling, immersive performance, or sustainable design. Bruford College is responding to all of this, shaping the innovations that are redefining our world.
I'm interested to know a bit more about your background and how that informs the leader you are today. You grew up in South Africa and developed your passion for music. What are your reflections on those early experiences?
So yes, I grew up in South Africa during a time of immense change, and that shaped me in ways I didn't really fully appreciate at the time. So I experienced firsthand how institutions, leadership, and culture could either hold people back or be a force for transformation. That understanding has never left me. When I first stepped into the world of higher education, I wasn't following a neatly carved plan. I was following a belief that creativity changes lives. My first 80 jobs were all about finding my voice in a country that was a very young and new democracy. But the reality was decades of inequality couldn't be undone overnight. Institutions and structures simply were not ready for the level of transformation that was needed. And those of us impacted by decades of apartheid laws were demanding change. So the rigid nature of those systems and structures made meaningful change feel impossible at times. I pushed, I challenged, I fought for new ways of thinking, but ultimately I had to accept that some barriers were not going to shift in that moment. And actually, that acceptance to me was pivotal. It really taught me that leadership isn't just about fighting the system from within. It's about knowing when to step away and when to seek new grounds where change is possible. Every step I've taken since has been driven by that same commitment to push the boundaries of what creative education and inclusivity can be. And that is what still drives me today.
And along that path, did you have any doubts that HE leadership was the path for you? Or did you have that clear focus that that's what you wanted to pursue and why you wanted to do it?
So I had doubts, Susanna, and that was largely driven by the fact that I deeply, deeply thought I could make it as a professional conductor, and that the HE path would be my backup. And actually, as I really started to understand the similar skills you have from being a conductor or training as a conductor and leading people, really showed me it was possible. And actually, I got intoxicated by the people and the characters in higher education and how responsive they are and how passionate they are about change. So, in a way, set off on an entirely different path, believed passionately that the concert platform was going to be for me. And now I've got a different type of concert platform with these inspirational people that touch my life every day.
How would you sum up your experiences so far in how that informs the leader you are today?
Gosh. So I often think about key lessons about leadership for me. You know, it's not about where you are, it's how you lead. So I always ask the sort of three questions. Are you making a meaningful difference? Are you driving the kind of change that matters? And are you giving people hope?
You've worked in a number of different institutions across your career so far. You mentioned South Africa, where you started, but also institutions in Czechia, the Netherlands, before coming to the UK. And you've stayed longer in some institutions than in others. What would you say have been some of the pivotal experiences in terms of your leadership growth during that time? And how is that related to staying in an institution or going somewhere new?
This is an interesting one to think about. So, to think about staying or moving on, staying within an institution allows you to build deep, lasting change. So, you have the ability to see ideas grow from a spark into something that reshapes the institution. One of the biggest moments for me came when I led a major shift in how we thought about conservatoire education, not just as a training ground for skills, but as a space where students learn to be cultural leaders. That kind of transformation takes time, trust, and persistence. Introducing popular music and music production courses into traditional conservatoire settings, leading practice research, driving international developments, those were the moments where I saw the power of staying, embedding ideas, and ensuring they take root. But moving on does bring different perspective. And every time I've stepped into a new institution, I've had to quickly adapt, learn its culture, figure out what was needed to change and to move it forward. And often that change was about innovation. Institutions, like artists, can't stand still. Leadership is about knowing when to push for the next evolution, when to reimagine what is possible.
And you talked a bit earlier about institutional values. How important are those to your leadership growth?
Absolutely critical. I think we have to live the values. We have to every day reflect on them, and it's got to be visible. You can't stick them up on a wall or a website and say these are your values. You have to absolutely live them, and your stakeholders have got to be able to identify those values in you.
And what advice would you give to emerging leaders about whether to stay within an institution or whether to move on? And to what extent do institutional values play a part in that?
I think, from my own perspective, I think critical. You've got to understand where you are and whether you can adopt those values. If you can't do it. So I would say be really, really clear about what you're signing up for. I do think it's a moment of strength and reflection to move to different institutions. There's so much learning you can do. And it allows you not to see blind spots. Sometimes we can become very comfortable in the familiar and the known. So I'm a great advocate for moving on. What's the sweet spot? I don't know. Is it 10 years? Is it 5 years? Is it 15 years? I've got no idea. I think the longest I've stayed was 13 years.
You talked earlier about your academic background and your leadership career, all of which have been within, as we talked about, creative education. And I'm wondering to what extent creativity plays a direct and active part in your leadership approach. And is that a help or a hindrance?
Creativity is my most powerful leadership tool. It allows me to think beyond convention, to challenge the status quo, and to find new solutions in an industry that is constantly evolving. The challenge is balance. So you can have too much management, but never enough leadership. Vision without structure is chaos, but structure without vision is stagnation. The best leadership, to me, is where creativity and strategic thinking collide, where big, bold ideas are backed by rigorous plans.
Have you had any instances at all where people have found your creative approach challenging as a leader? And how have you dealt with that?
Yes, many, many, many times. I think I've learned that you must leave no space for ambiguity. Creative people are amazing in how they use different strategies, and you have to be crystal clear about the vision, and you must be committed to that vision. And once you commit to that vision, you must leave no space for ambiguity. It must be clear, because you will get the best out of your creative workforce for that. These are people who are passionate about what they do, absolutely passionate. It's their way of existing, it's their way of being. So they love vision, but they want to understand precisely how it fits into their world.
Some of the decisions that you make as a leader can be really challenging, especially when they impact on other people. Reflecting on your leadership career so far, how have you evolved your approach to making some of those harder decisions?
Early on, I thought leadership was about finding the perfect decision. Now, I understand that leadership is about making the best decision possible with the information available. Again, without any ambiguity, and then owning it. Tough decisions define leadership. And what truly matters is transparency, accountability, and the courage to stand by your choices.
And you mentioned just there about using information to help make the best decisions. And I guess we're in a really data rich environment now, particularly in comparison with the past. But analysing data can also be quite challenging. Has using data well been an area of development for you across your leadership path?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Um, I think you've got to really understand data quite clearly. You've got to understand where anecdote features in data, where the nuances are in data. You have got to have a sight clearly on where you're going. And I think perhaps earlier on in my journey, I wasn't as confident and comfortable in raw data, as you would call it. But the more I've developed, the more I've come to really, really rely on it to help inform my decision making, to understand how the sector is moving, to understand how different parts of your organization is moving. And it's such a critical piece of finding a way through the difficult circumstances we have in. There are many things I think I find ways of reflecting and doing it differently. I did this as a musician, you know. You've got to find something new in something you've performed over and over again, sometimes night after night in a season. And, you know, if you get to a stage that you can't find something new in Beethoven or Brahms or whoever, then I think you need to reflect on why you're still there. So you always have to learn. It doesn't matter how many times you've done it. You've got to find those learning points, reflect in how you might make that differently, how you might execute it in a different way the next time, how you might do it more effectively, more efficiently, or not at all.
In that musical analogy that you talked about there, you're engaging with your audience. And as a CEO and principal of Rose Bruford College, you're engaging with your staff. How do you take people with you?
Again, it's something I learned, you know, as a young conductor. You've got 80 musicians, all with an individual voice, that you're trying to create something cohesive that tells something, that tells a story, that helps people to imagine or inspire. So I try to be as clear as I can about what it is that I'm communicating, why I'm communicating it, and why it is important. So I make sure that staff feel involved in the vision, that they understand the importance of delivering the visions, that we check in on the milestone, that the student experience is key to everything we do. So I do include the students in that picture as well. They are our most powerful advocates for what we do, and we owe it to them to make sure that the decisions we make create stronger, more sustainable institutions so that they can have the amazing transformative time that I've had.
As a senior leader, you've also got to look out for yourself as well. How do you manage your own resilience?
A lot of running, but by staying connected to purpose, really. Keeping sight of the bigger picture keeps me grounded. And of course, sometimes resilience comes from knowing when to step back, regain perspective, and return with renewed focus. So I very much believe in looking after myself. I love people. I love company. I love socializing. So they are all part of how I find ways in managing my own well-being. When I took this role, quite a few people said to me that it's lonely at the top. And I thought, I'm going to be determined not to feel lonely at the top. And so far, I've not.
And thinking back across your leadership career so far, do you find that managing your own resilience gets easier as you progress your roles, get older, or is it the same as it was before?
I think, again, it changes and evolves. I mean, I have a sense of when I have to step back, or I have a sense when my run needs to be longer or shorter, often shorter because of the knees. But I think you've got to listen to your own rhythm. Here we go with another musical reference. You know, how you adjust your pace. What is the lead melody you're listening to at any particular point? What's the phrasing? Where's the breath? All those sort of things. So, you know, everything doesn't have to be at 120 miles an hour. So I think I've had to learn how to look after myself better, because I understand looking after myself means I can look after my staff, my colleagues, my friends, my students in a better way.
You have a significant sector presence. Was there a particular point in your career when you made a conscious decision to get involved with the sector more broadly?
So I made a deliberate choice really early in my career to engage beyond the institutions I would work for, because change doesn't happen in isolation. Being part of sector-wide conversations allows me to shape policy, advocate for the arts on a global level, and bring transformative ideas back into my own leadership practice. I've got this thing about having something to say, and I think if you've got something to say, you've got to be able to do it beyond your own institution. I think that actually is so valuable to your staff, students, stakeholders in your own institution, for them to understand that you are connected, that you have something to say out there, and that hopefully it has impact.
And to what extent would you say that engagement in the sector has supported your own career and leadership development as you've progressed through different posts?
I think it really has helped my confidence. Especially earlier we spoke about lived experience. When I started this journey, um, you know, I literally would be the only person of color walking into the room. Then later on, I'd spot a few other people. But it gave me a confidence to really understand the dynamics and how you find a voice.
And I guess establishing that voice within the sector means that you can target the matters you want to influence, such as leadership diversity.
I do feel I've been very targeted about what I want to say, when I wanted to say it, where I wanted to say it. And I'm proud of many moments. I'm proud of bringing to forefront the discussion about the role of executive search in recruiting leadership. I'm so proud of the work that Ben Tucker and the Minerva team have done, in particular on the transparency of that application to long list, to short list, to place. We've got a long way to do, but shining the light of that at the time that I did was very controversial, but it had to be said. Talking about disaggregating BAME, again, I had many vice chancellors challenge me on that, but I kept on with the narrative. What does it mean? Who are you talking about when you say BAME? It's important that you understand disaggregation when you talk about it.
I want to build upon the point about how a senior leader can influence within the sector, but also beyond at national or government policy level. And at the start of our conversation, you talked about your wider advocacy for the arts, for creative education, but at a time when there are so many challenges in HE, in the NHS, in the country overall. Why should the arts and smaller specialist institutions be a priority? And as a leader, how do you tell that story?
In terms of the creative industries in the UK, powerful, the biggest, um, twice the size of automotive and engineering, whatever the combination is. It's thriving. And specialist creative institutions places graduates in those industries. So when universities suffer, we say that the NHS suffers because they train doctors and nurses and physiotherapists. When specialist institutions suffers, the creative industries suffer. So we have got to tell this to you. So we shouldn't only think about the creative industries as a commodity. We should think about how it transforms life, how it makes transition into care homes more palatable because of the research we do, the work we do with AI, the work we do with immersive technologies. We have to become far more sophisticated about how we tell the stories. Yes, it's got to be funded appropriately, but I think our argument gets lost when we say, give us more money to do things the same way. And I must say, Guild HE, our representative body, has been really fantastic with this, and the work that Brook Story Church is increasingly doing about getting this diverse body of institutions around the right tables in the right spaces. It is important. Governments change, civil service remains the same. So you've got to make sure that it is understood and the stories are understood about the impact and about the power of the UK creative industries. It's such a good news story. It's such a powerful story. I think 1 in 5 jobs in London is in the creative industries. And, these sort of figures we should be able to placard and sing about, because the joy it gives people, the immense pleasure, the challenge. I can talk about this forever, but we have got to tell the story in a more sophisticated way about why it should be funded appropriately. And of course, we need to make sure that our operating models are sustainable. We've got to do that. And many are talking about the size and the shape of the UK higher education sector. I will, of course, say that merger, acquisition, shared services is only part of the question or the solution. It's not the only solution. And in fact, it would significantly damage the UK higher education sector if it wasn't as diverse as it is now. It's something we should be so proud of, that there are institutions of different shape and sizes that students can have the most amazing transformational experiences. And these institutions are producing world-leading alumni. But as ever with any good storytelling, you've got to tell it with impact, and people can imagine it. So when they're sitting in the West End or they're watching a television show, we don't want to go, oh, wow, well, that's because of the specialists, but we want to go, wow, these specialist institutions are really, really developing and training students to do these jobs. The London New Year's Eve fireworks show, Rose Bruford College, creative lighting design students, all behind that. And so the stories goes, whether it's the ballet schools, whether it's the art and design institutions, these graduates are everywhere because of the transferable skills students gain when studying the creative degrees. The research happening in small specialist institutions in the UK is outstanding. It is truly world leading. It has impact and it changes people's lives. It makes work happening in the NHS, in prison services. I was going to say easier, but it has an impact on that activity. And we don't tell those stories often enough. We tend to tell the stories of the superstars, the Emmy winners, the Oscar winners. It's far more than this. Yes, it can be seen as a luxury, but there are currently students in fashion design, in specialist institutions, thinking about sustainability, thinking about wearable technology, thinking about waste reduction. There are amazing things happening in specialist institutions. We've got to tell those stories so that it's seen as a necessity, as a critical part of life and of our lives, rather than, oh, it's just there for entertainment or for enjoyment.
We've picked up at various points in our conversation about the challenging times for the HE sector at the moment, and the HE sector into the future is going to need leadership. What are your reflections about the type of leadership that's necessary within the challenging HE context that we have?
The sector needs leaders who are adaptable, courageous, and unshakably committed to their values. But we can't just expect these leaders to emerge. We have to create the conditions for them to thrive. So this, to me, means mentorship, sponsorship, investment in leadership development, and the willingness to challenge outdated models of leadership that no longer serve our world.
And how would you describe an outdated model of leadership in comparison to what you think it needs to look like?
I think you've got to be visible. I think your students and the staff, your sector has to see you. I think you need to understand that management is not the same as leadership. And I think often in our sector, because you are building a career that often comes from being a lecturer, from being in professional services, and you're stepping up, you've not undertaken a management qualification or a leadership qualification. You might have attended a seminar here, a workshop there, a mentorship program there. When I was going through this journey, the Minerva or the Aspire program didn't exist. It just simply wasn't there. So you've got to find ways to understand that you've got to be different as a leader, that no industry stays the same. So if you are using typically the 1950s, but 1950s management techniques, it's not going to be effective for a student body that is thinking entirely differently, that has had access to information in a completely different way, that expects ethical and transparent behavior to be a core of what you do. So I try to have something that is authentic to me, and I do that by listening a lot. I listen to the students a lot. I can't always do what they want, but I listen to them a lot, because I think through them I see the world differently. I see what they find meaning in a different way. And then I've got to be the CEO and think about how you shape that in strategy. So the three co-founders, the wonderful women, Rose Bruford, Mary Henneke-Heaton, and Edith Scorer, who founded this institution, they called it their adventure. And I think about it as an adventure. And when you are on an adventure, your style, your approach has to change constantly, because you never know what's going to come your way. That's the entire philosophy or raison d'etre of adventure. It's the unexpected. So how are you preparing yourself for the unexpected? And if you are fixated on traditional models, then you can't be prepared for the unexpected, because the unexpected happens quickly.
And how do we encourage emerging leaders of the future?
I think the work that Minerva and the Aspire program are doing are inspirational, for emerging leaders to see different people that have done it. The work you are doing, Susanna, in this podcast activity, talking to leaders, finding ways to articulate these voices, and ultimately, understanding that leaders might look different in the future, that there is a world, that while the world is moving at the pace, things are happening so quickly that you might find them in the most unusual places. I think our sector has perhaps been scared of looking further outside. Are you an academic? Are you a professional support services? What do you know about the curriculum? What do you know about the subject detail and so forth? I think it's time to turn that on its head and find the best people for a thriving future for higher education.
You've reached the position of being a principal and CEO. Finishing up our conversation today, is that the pinnacle of your leadership development, or is leadership still a learning process for you?
So the moment you think you've arrived, you stop leading. The world changes, industries evolve, and we must evolve with it. So my goal isn't just to lead an institution, it's to help shape a sector that is more inclusive, innovative, and future ready. Leadership isn't about holding power, it's about using it to create lasting change.
Randall, it's been great talking with you today. Thank you so much for being my guest.
Thank you so much, Susanna.
Job Shadowing HE was written and presented by Susanna Marsden, and you can find out more information about her consultancy work at susannamarsden.co.uk. Audio production and music was by me, Rodri Marsden. Find out more about this podcast and hear previous episodes at jobshadowinghe.com.